Okay, so we're going to start off in Isaiah chapter 6. The first 13 verses of Isaiah 6 are really the account of Isaiah's call into ministry. If you didn't bring your own Bibles, you can find that on page 487. I'm going to read the first 13 verses, and then we're going to dig in. So Isaiah chapter 6, verses 1 through 13. Here's what we read. In the year that King Uzziah died, I saw the Lord seated on a throne, high and exalted, and the train of his robe filled the temple. Above him were seraphs, and by the way, seraphs are a type of angel. Above him were seraphs, each with 6 wings. With 2 wings they covered their faces, with 2 wings they covered their feet, and with 2 they were flying. And they were calling to one another, Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. At the sound of their voices, the doorposts and the thresholds shook, and the temple was filled with smoke. Woe to me, I cried, I'm ruined, for I'm a man of unclean lips, and I live among a people of unclean lips, and my eyes have seen the King, the Lord Almighty. Then one of the seraphs flew to me with a live coal in his hand, which he had taken with tongs from the altar. With it he touched my mouth and said, See, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away, and your sin atoned for. Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, Whom shall I send, and who will go for us? And I said, Here I am, send me. He said, Go and tell this people, be ever hearing, but never understanding. Be ever seeing, but never perceiving. Make the heart of this people calloused, make their ears dull, and close their eyes. Otherwise they might see with their eyes, hear with their ears, understand with their hearts, and turn and be healed. Then I said, For how long, O Lord? And he answered, Until the cities lie ruined and without inhabitant, until the houses are left deserted, and the fields ruined and ravaged, until the Lord has sent everyone far away, and the land is utterly forsaken. And though 1/10 remains in the land, it will again be laid waste. But as a terebinth and oak leave stumps when they're cut down, so the holy seed will be the stump in the land. Okay, I'd like to start actually here at the end and talk a little bit about who Isaiah was as a person. Christian tradition says this, that Isaiah, the prophet, his father was the brother of King Amaziah. And since his father was the brother of the king, he would have grown up as one of the elites. He would have lived in the palace. He would have probably been very wealthy. He had access, you'll see this throughout the book, Isaiah had access to all the kings. He was a man of power and influence. One of the things that, as you read through this book, one of the things that becomes plain is that Isaiah was a man of intellectual and artistic genius. I mean, anyone who writes a book and 3,000 later, people are still gathering together to study and read it. I mean, he was genius. And he really, this is what he was great at. He was a fantastic communicator. He was like a person with a golden tongue, that everyone, when he spoke, they would have hung on his every word, and what a power that would have been in Israel at the time. This was an oral culture. People would, they listened to great orators speak, and they would have hung on his every word. And you'll notice in verse 1, it says, In the year that King Uzziah died. Uzziah was Amaziah's son, so Isaiah and Uzziah would have been cousins of one another. And one of the things, if you read about King Uzziah's life, one of the things that happened is he was struck with leprosy because he disobeyed God. And so for the last years of his life, he was cordoned away. And here's Isaiah, who is really probably in his own time just a head above in terms of sort of intellectual academics. He was a man with a golden tongue. Uzziah is cordoned away. He was probably out on the courts of the palace. The people were probably rallying to him. He probably saw in himself all this potential to set things straight. I mean, the country was sort of going through a tough time, and he was the person on the scene that probably everyone was rallying to and looking to. And then, I'll say this sort of tongue-in-cheek, he went to a worship service, and the last person he ever expected to meet there showed up, God. I say it tongue-in-cheek because, I mean, even for myself, we gather together for worship like this. I expect to see my friends and gather together with people. I mean, in some ways, wouldn't we all just be surprised if God showed up? And yet that's where he is. He's in the temple. The last person he ever thought he'd meet there showed up, God. And he has this vision of God seated on his throne with the train of his robe, heaven touching earth. And there are these angels who are singing his praises. And this vision radically changes him. And again, just to get toward the end, these last verses here, finally God says, who shall I send? And he raises his hand and he says, send me. And God says, okay, here's the mission I have for you. Go tell this people, be ever hearing but never understanding, be ever seeing but never perceiving. Make the heart of this people callous, make their ears dull. In other words, here's the ministry I have for you, you great orator, you intellectual genius. I want you to go and speak my word to the people, and they're going to hate it. They're not going to understand. They're going to wish you shut up. And okay, listen. So as a person who experienced a call into ministry at one point, I just felt God pressing upon my heart. He wants me to go in and preach his word. I can just tell you plainly, what a great church we have here. You guys are some of the most encouraging people, and it really does help, because from time to time people come to me and they'll say, listen, what you said, it changed my life. It like something happened when I heard you speak, and I'll tell you what, since it's my profession and the thing I do, it's very encouraging and keeps me going, and I can only imagine the opposite, that every time I stood to speak, people would say, you're terrible. You should really be quiet. You are annoying, be quiet. And actually Isaiah, when he hears this, you're going to go and speak, and people are going to wish you shut up. He asks this question, you can see in verse 11, for how long? Well, if that's the assignment, how long I got to do that? And here's the answer. Till the nation is basically destroyed. Like, okay, Scott, I'm sending you to Sunlight Community Church. I want you to get up and speak. Every time you do, the people are going to tell you you're terrible. Well, how long? Basically till the church is destroyed and everyone's left. That would be a tough assignment, especially for someone who's used to the praise and adoration of other people, to kind of get the back of people's hand and, to have people reviling and hating you and wishing you would go away. How does Isaiah get sort of the moral courage to carry out this assignment? How do we, when we're going through tough things, where do we find our center when things are going bad and things are falling apart and the darkness is closing in? That's what I think this passage can show us. And it's really the first part, this vision that Isaiah gets, that when you understand what he saw, it makes sense of what the rest of his ministry is going to be. So this is what he saw. It says, in the year that King Uzziah died, he saw the Lord seated on a throne, high and exalted. The train of his robe filled the temple. So he's gone into the temple, and all of a sudden he catches this vision. He sees God in heaven, and his robe is coming down toward the earth. And above him there are these angels, these seraphs. They have 6 wings. They're covering their face, they're covering their feet, and then they're flying in the air, and they're calling to one another. And these are the words they're calling in verse 3. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. They're singing this song out. And as they do, it says the sound of their voices shook the doorposts and the thresholds, and the whole temple was filled with smoke. Just this amazing vision. And this is how I guess I would kind of categorize what's happened here. Isaiah was a person who grew up in the palace. He had this concept of God, right? He knew God was the creator of heaven and earth. He probably had more of the Bible memorized than any of us in this room. He had this concept of God. This is the moment where his concept of God left just being a concept and became a reality. He abandoned the concept of God for the real God. And I would just say that is what's needed for us to face whatever we need to face in life. That we don't just have a concept of God, we know things about him, but somehow or another we encounter him and he becomes absolutely real. I want to spend some time talking about the words that these angels were singing. Holy, holy, holy is the Lord Almighty. The whole earth is full of his glory. There are 2 words in particular. They're kind of words you only talk about in church, and so I think sometimes because we only talk about them in church, we really never know exactly what they mean. The first of which is holy. When the angels were ascribing this word holy to God, what were they saying? The Hebrew word holy, kadosh, it really means, in its root, something like this: to be set apart. And probably the idea, if you were to pick a modern English equivalent, was something like this: unique, one of a kind, special, beautiful. They saw something. God is not like everything and everyone else. He's unique. He's one of a kind. He's set apart. He's special. He's got this beauty to him that stands alone, if that makes any kind of sense. And I'd like to also talk about this word glory. The Hebrew word kavod, it means something like this: heaviness or weightiness. And it just so happens that we have a way in which we use this in modern English, so this helps. You're talking to someone, and you're getting really deep kind of philosophically, and someone says something, and all of a sudden the room goes silent, and someone says, wow, that was heavy. That's this word, glory, kavod. Wow, that blew my mind. Right? Like that was heavy. I think in modern English it means something like this: profound, significant, weighty. And when these angels are crying, unique, one of a kind, special, beautiful, that's God. And the whole earth is filled with his profundity. It's filled with his significance. It's filled with his weightiness, his glory. That's what they're crying. I should say one more thing, as long as we're talking about Hebrew. So you have here, it's not holy is the Lord Almighty, but holy, holy, holy. This is one of the interesting features of the Hebrew language. In order to talk about the magnitude of something, Hebrew uses repetition. And so I'll give you a couple of examples. These are strange examples. I don't know why I picked these out. But in Genesis chapter 14, there is this example where people are fleeing from Sodom and Gomorrah, and the kings, as they're fleeing, they fall into these tar pits. And if you read it in the English, it just says tar pits. But the original Hebrew says pits. And it has to do with the magnitude of things. These aren't just ordinary pits. I don't know what an ordinary pit is, but these are pits. These are like giant, profound tar pits that they fell into. It was not easy for them to get out. They weren't just pits. They were pits. I'll give you another example in 2 Kings chapter 25, which actually, that's the account of the temple in Jerusalem being destroyed by the Babylonian army. It talks about how all the things in the temple were carried away to Babylon. And as it talks about the things that were carried away, it talks about the bowls and jars, which if you read about it in your English Bibles, it'll say they were made of pure gold. But that's not what the Hebrew says. It actually says that they were made of gold. It's not just gold. There's gold, and then there's gold. Pure, this was gold. You get it? In Hebrew, if something's good, it's good. If it's good, it's better. If it's good, that's the best. God isn't just holy. He's not just special, one of a kind, unique. He's holy, holy, holy. He is the most special, the most one of a kind, the most set apart, the most unique, the most beautiful. And this whole earth is filled with his profundity, significance, and weightiness. That is what these seraphs are celebrating. And they're calling to one another. They're enthralled with the idea of it. They keep talking about how beautiful this God is. And, maybe this illustration will make sense, maybe not. But let me try it. Suppose that you grew up in a family that they had money. Somewhere back, your ancestors struck it rich, and your family, you have money. And you grow up and you meet either him or her, and you're enthralled with them. They're awesome, and if that person could be mine, that would be great. And they claim to be enthralled with you as well. And so at some point or another, you get married, and here's the thing. Shortly after you get married to one another, it becomes obvious to you, they didn't marry you for you. They married you because of the money. And maybe it so happens that they came to realize they can't get their hands on that money, and now all of a sudden they're through with you. Well, if I can't get that money, I didn't marry you for you. I married you for the money. They're out of here. Can you imagine a situation like that? So how would you feel if that happened to you? Someone, they didn't marry you for you. You thought they did, but they just married you for the money, and now they've gone. How would you feel? Used? Manipulated? Just like an object tossed aside? So here's the thing. How many of you have met people and they used to believe in God? And they got into some tight spot, and they sort of viewed God as like a blessings bank. And so they got into that tough spot, and they thought, okay, I'm in this tough spot right now. God, you should open up the blessing bank, and the blessing should just pour out right now and get me out of the situation. And it didn't, and at the time, because the blessing bank didn't open up, they said, I'm through with God now. Like, I've had enough, I'm done. You know what? Those people never had God for God. You know what? They married him for his money. Does that make sense? And I think, by the way, when it comes to who God is, so many of us, I mean, we wouldn't like to admit it here in church, but that's how we treat him. And if you think about God's attributes, like his power, often we are attracted to the power of God, not simply for who God is, but because what we can get out of it. Like, we get in a tough spot. What do we want? We want the power of God to show up. Why? We have this selfish inclination toward wanting that power. We selfishly want the wisdom of God. We get into a tough situation. We want God's wise understanding so that we can navigate the difficulties of life. Even the love and mercy of God. We have this kind of hole in our heart. We need some sense of acceptance. We feel some low-level amount of guilt no matter what. We need our sins to be atoned for. And so even the love and mercy of God, to a certain extent, we want that selfishly. It was actually Jonathan Edwards who pointed this out. He said, holiness is that one attribute that if you want it, it's not because you get something from it. You just want God for God. He's beautiful, he's special, he's unique, he's one of a kind, and that's what these angels are celebrating. Maybe I can put it this way. So in this room, I'm certain of this, every single one of us, there's some certain kind of music that we enjoy. So some of us, we just really enjoy classical music, and when we have the opportunity, we either just, in our home, or when we get in the car, or we pop the headphones in, we just turn on that classical music, and we enjoy it. We're enthralled with it. We like it. Some of us, it's pop music or rap or whatever. I mean, just, again, we get in the car, we crank it up, we like the beat. There's some other weird ones among us who like country music. I don't know why you want to sing about your pickup truck, which has a flat tire and your dog left, but you love it. I don't know, again, and you love it. And if I asked you, why? What do you get from it? You wouldn't say, well, I'm trying to advance in my career. Or you wouldn't say, in some way or another, this puts me ahead of other people. Why do you listen to the music? Because it's beautiful. There's some quality that you like it for itself. And these angels, they're not worshiping and celebrating and enthralled with God for what they can get out of him, but for just who he is. He's special, special, special. And the whole earth is filled with his profundity, significance, weightiness. And this is a vision that Isaiah sees, this God who he's worthy in and of himself of the greatest praise and adoration. Let me try something. I've talked about some of these things before, but my hope is just to whatever extent at some point you'll just pause and maybe take this in, and hopefully you'll just catch that glimpse as well, and God can stop being a concept and just at some point or another become a reality. So, someone once gave me this analogy. It just really works for me. So they said this, the distance between Earth and the sun, 93 million miles. And suppose that you wanted to represent those 93 million miles with just a sheet of paper. And so, you just have one sheet of paper. That's 93 million miles. How tall would the stack of paper need to be in order to get to the nearest star to us? And believe it or not, in order to get to the nearest star, you would need a stack of paper that is 70 feet tall. Wow, that's pretty incredible. How about our galaxy? You know that we belong to a galaxy called the Milky Way galaxy. You look up at the stars at night, you're probably aware of that. At one point, Abraham was asked to count the stars if he could. Did you know that just in our Milky Way galaxy, scientists have now discovered that there are 300 billion stars, billion with a B, stars? And if you were to travel from one end of the galaxy to the other, and this piece of paper represented 93 million miles, you know that you would need to stack up a stack of paper that's 310 miles high to represent the distance from one end of the galaxy to the other. I mean, to me, this is just absolutely incredible. I'm going to show you a picture here. Some of you who are kind of in the back, you'll struggle to see this. Those of you who are in the front, you maybe see this more. What you see on the screen here, those are not individual stars. Those are individual galaxies. It was taken by the Hubble telescope. Here's what the NASA scientists did. They decided to point the telescope, and the point that they're pointing at is no bigger than like the size of a pen. And this is the image that returns to the outer reaches of the universe. Those are individual galaxies, all the same size or bigger than our own galaxy. And at every point, boom, 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 boom. That's what it looks like out there. Now, this is what Isaiah says about this. He says, "Lift your eyes and look to the heavens. Who created all these? He who brings out the starry host one by one and calls each by name, because of his great power and mighty strength, not one of them is missing." So, if you're inclined to believe this at all, that there is a God who stretched out the universe like this, would you agree with this statement? This is not the kind of God that we can make our personal assistant. I want you to think about that. He is totally other, totally unique, we're not like him. We're not like him at all. This is interesting in theology. This is what theologians have done. They've gone through the Bible and they've categorized all the attributes of God. The Bible says that God's good, he's just, he's righteous, and they've sort of categorized all the attributes, and they've categorized them into two lists. The first list they've called the communicable attributes, and here's what theologians mean. These are the attributes that God has in himself, but he shares with us, his people. So God's good, he's just, he's merciful, he's loving, he's wise, he's rational, he has knowledge. And what theologians have said is like all these things, like we don't have them the way God has them. He has them in sort of a maximized kind of way. He's the epitome of each one of these. We have some small sliver, but he shares those with us. They said there's another kind of attribute you read through the Bible, and it's clear that these are attributes that God does not share with us, like independence. Here's what that word means. All of us depend on other things for our life. Like the fact that we're breathing right now tells us that we depend upon air. If all of a sudden there was no air, we would die. Food, we all need food. Light, we all need light. Water, we all need water. Our lives depend on something else. In fact, everything in this universe depends on something else for its existence, except for just one, God. He depends on no one and nothing else for his existence. The second one, that God's immutable, which means he doesn't change. He's the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. One thing about our life, we all know this. I mean, things are going to change. We're constantly changing. Our attitudes, our everything about us is constantly changing, but not God. You know, one of the names that the Bible points out as one of the lead names for God in the Bible is this, the I am. Same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. God doesn't share that with us. He's the only one who never changes. He's eternal, which means that he's without beginning and without end. And this last one, he's infinite. You know, talking about the size of our universe. I mean, some of us were just like, whoa, that's too much for us to think about. That's nothing. All of us, we're all finite. This universe is finite. Not God. He is infinite. Maybe I'll come at this another way. Do me a favor. Look down at your hand and pick out one hair. So just, some of you are giggling. You have a really long hair. Or the person next to you has a really long hair. I want you to really take a good look at that hair. And here's what I'll do. This is a picture of a hair under a microscope. And here's as you're looking at it, what I want you to realize, across the breadth of that hair, scientists tell us there are approximately 10 cells, human cells, that kind of make up across that hair. And some of you're going to hate this next picture because it's going to remind you of high school biology and you hated that class. But this is a basic picture of a cell. Cell has this outer membrane. There's all these sort of cellular machines that are at work, the mitochondria, and then in the middle of that cell, and you just keep looking at the size of your hair, there's 10 across. In the middle, there is this tiny little nucleus. Modern science is so awesome because we have these fantastic microscopes now that can see things we could have never even imagined. Here is a picture of inside that nucleus, we have these things called our chromosomes. We get 23 from our father, 23 from our mother. They make up the genetic material that makes us, us. Look at this picture. Isn't that fascinating? Here's what happens. In these chromosomes, we have this DNA that's all wound up. The DNA is made up of 4 chemicals: adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine. And this is what happens. Each of those chemicals is like a letter. In fact, scientists, they refer to A, T, G, and C. And they're all in order, exact order. They are the sort of genetic code that makes you you. Every single one of your cells, by the way, in our genetic code, do you know there's 3.1 billion letters that make up, they're all in exactly the same order. If you were to make a book with 3.1 billion letters in it, and you were to pile that book up, it'd be as high as the Washington Monument. That's in every one of your cells. And by the way, every single one of your cells, no matter what page in that book you turn to, it is exactly the same. It has to be exactly the same. When our letters stop being the same, that's when we start having health problems. It's exact, and no one, if we were to take different cells from no one has the same book. That's what makes each one of us who we are. And you know these chemical compounds, adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine, they're made up of things like carbon and hydrogen and nitrogen and oxygen. Each one of those chemicals, are made up of atoms that are made up of protons, neutrons, and electrons. And that's as far as I used to go in high school, but now they discovered that those protons and neutrons are made up of quarks and leptons and muons. And there is a God who is infinite that put all this together. And I don't know about you, but at least for me, that's heavy, dude. That was wild. The kind of, not only a God who stretches out the stars in the sky, but with the uttermost detail in the tiniest hair on my hand has the design, the wisdom, the understanding, the knowledge to put this together. And this is the point these angels are making, that the whole earth is filled with that kind of profundity. That no matter where you go, every square inch, it's not like you get over here and say, well, there's nothing profound here. I just found a hair, It's amazing. And these angels, they just never get enough. God is so special. He's so awesome. He's so beautiful. He stands alone. He's not like us. Now, here's the deal. When, for Isaiah, it moves from concept to reality, something immediately happens. He realized he's doomed. In fact, his words, you see it in verse 5. He says, "Woe to me, I cried, I'm ruined." You know why? Because as soon as he saw the reality of God, he realized he's like the person who marries for just the money. He wanted God for whatever concept he had, but when he saw the real God, he realized how he's been treating. I'm a sinner. I'm a man of unclean lips. I'm ruined. And what occurs next is the basic gospel that we talk about here every single week. These are the categories: sin, salvation, and service. He realizes he's a sinner. He realizes he's like anyone who just marries for money. He doesn't want God himself. He just wants the things of God. He has the concept. Now he has the reality. He's ruined. The next thing that happens, this is my favorite part of the entire passage. You've got to see this. In verse 6, this is what it says. It says, "Then one of the seraphs, the angels, they flew to me with a live coal in his hand, which he had taken with tongs from the altar. With it he touched my mouth and said, 'See, this has touched your lips. Your guilt is taken away, and your sin is atoned for, you have to catch the picture of what's going on here. Those of you who have been here now, as we've been going through the Bible, hopefully this is going to make a lot of sense to you. Others of you, just try to catch up. Here we go. In the temple, there were several pieces of furniture. One of them was an altar. And the reason for the altar it was this, that when God's people had sinned, God had made a provision for them. You see, sin deserves punishment. In fact, the Bible says the wages of sin is death. We deserve to die, but God makes this provision. He said, this is what you do whenever you sin, bring a sacrifice into my temple. And so this is what the Israelites did. They brought lambs, 1 year old, without any kind of defect. They brought them there to the temple, and the priests had them do this. They placed their hand on the head of that animal. And whatever their sin was, whatever they'd committed, whatever they were aware that was their wrongdoing, they confessed that. They said, okay, I'm a sinner. These are the things I've done. And when they put their hand on the head of the animal, it's as though the sin was transferred from the person onto this animal. And then the animal was put to death. See, the wages of sin is death. God allowed this provision that instead of me dying, this animal died. My sin is symbolically transferred on that animal. And then here's what the priest did. They took the dead body of that animal, and they brought them over to the altar, and it was what was called a burnt offering. They set the flesh of that animal on the altar until it completely burned up. And there was a fire going there, and maybe you'll remember this. That fire was no ordinary fire. It got started by God. When they had blessed the tabernacle in the wilderness for the first time, they were praying. All of a sudden, fire fell from heaven and whoosh, consumed that altar. And there was even an instruction that they were not to allow any kind of strange fire to ever come near that altar. It had to be the fire of God. And this was the picture. That God himself was burning up that sin. In fact, as the smoke went up to heaven, the book of Leviticus calls it a sweet aroma rising to God. Why? Because as you saw that smoke go up, it's like your sins were evaporating away and you were taken care of, you were atoned for. And the picture was this: we can't do anything about our sin itself. Only God can take it away. And it's that fire of God that is the instrument that God gave that took it away. And here's the thing, the Old Testament just merely looked forward to what would finally happen here on the cross. I don't know if you remember this, but when Jesus first came, they said, behold, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. And when Jesus was hanging there on the cross, here's what happened. God took all our sin, all our shame, everything we'd ever done, and he transferred on to Jesus. The wages of sin is death. We're supposed to die. What happened to Jesus on the cross? He died there. That's the salvation. And that's what the altar represents. And so this is what I mean, his sin is taken away. Sin and then salvation. And then this is what's neat. Service. So the words that come next, as soon as his sins are atoned for, whom shall I send? Who will go? And he puts his hand up. I'll go. I'll go. Oh, you want me to preach to a bunch of people who are going to hate me? Okay. How long do I have to do it for? Till the whole nation's destroyed? Got it. I'll go. Why? How's he able? It's because he knows that the God of the universe who stretched out the sky, who created the DNA and the hairs on our hand, the God of whom the angels just are constantly enthralled, singing about his beauty, proclaiming his weightiness, significance, profundity, and glory, that God loves me. And even though I married him for his money and I turned my back on him, I could care less about him, I've sinned against him, even though he's still willing to go to every extent to save me from our sin and put me to work in his kingdom. And I don't know. I would guess that most of us walked in these doors with a concept of God. If there was any moment in which, with Isaiah, it moved from just concept to reality, then if you're hearing God say, whom shall I send? Hand up. You'll understand. Because this is the God of the universe, and he loves us. And I just encourage anyone, if you've heard his voice for the first time today, don't just walk away and pretend that it was nothing. Why not today put your faith in Jesus Christ and begin living a new life.